Hey everybody, we will be starting our next chapter, which is chapter 11. Chapter 11 is entitled Elections. So you should be reading chapter 11. Last week we read chapter 10. And if you remember, we are not reading chapter 9. I went ahead and scratched chapter 9 from our required reading. So you should be reading chapter 11. Now, chapter 11 is very timely because we are literally right in the middle of a presidential election year. So, understanding how elections work, understanding who votes, understanding what influences turnout, what influences people to vote, I think is essential for your age group and just you as a citizen. So, for most of you, all of you, this will be your first presidential election. And so you should be very excited, but you should also be prepared as you're moving forth and becoming a part of the electoral process. And so some of the learning objectives of this particular chapter, I think, will resonate with you guys directly. And some of it, I don't think you'll quite identify with readily, but in the future, it will make sense to you. So the learning objectives for this particular chapter are 11.1, which is explain low turnout in U.S. elections. And 11.2, review the variables that predict who is most likely to vote and why. 11.3, review the variables that predict who votes how. 11.4, criticize the theory of electoral realignment. We'll touch on that one briefly, but that will not be a section or learning objective that I will test you on heavily. And then 11.5 is explain the strategies of winning elections. That's also another one that we'll touch on, but we'll do that in a more contemporary way as well. So this particular video, there'll be two videos. This is the first of two. This particular video will focus on 11.1, 11.2, and a little bit of 11.3, but 11.1 and 2 might be the majority of the focus. So the text talks about very directly voter turnout. Now listen, you'll read this and you may or may not directly get what they mean by turnout initially. Because you see numbers like voter turnout during the presidential election years, which this is one of them, being as high as 65% or 55%. But wait, we have to stop. We've got to back up. What does that mean? Turnout is literally only the people who are registered to vote, not people who are eligible. There's two different things. People who are eligible is anyone who has citizenship or naturalized citizenship in the United States, who is 18 or older, and does not have a felony charge in a state where felons cannot vote. So those are some of the basic requirements. So citizenship, whether it be birthright or natural citizenship, birthright citizenship meaning you were born here in the U.S., naturalized citizenship meaning you obtained citizenship in the U.S., 18 years or older. Sometimes you can register before, but you can't vote technically until you're 18. And then you do not have any felonies in a state where felons are prohibited from voting. So that's eligibility. Just because you're eligible does not mean you have to register. Registering to vote is something separate from being eligible to vote. So when we measure turnout, we're not measuring how many people who are over the age of 18, who are citizens and who do not have prior felonies are turning up to vote. We're not measuring that. We're measuring of the people who decided to register to vote at some given time. What is the percentage of those people that showed up? The percentages of the turnout is way smaller than even those who are registered to vote. And that percentage is way smaller than those who are eligible to vote. So turnout, registered, eligible. The unfortunate part is here in the U.S., we have a ton of people, millions, who are eligible to vote because they meet some of the basic criteria, but they do not register. And if you are not registered, you can't show out and turn up and vote. So we're not talking about the eligible voters. We're not necessarily talking about the registered voters. At this moment, we're just talking about those who show up to the polls, who are registered, and who actually engage in voting in any given election. So your text says our national voter turnout during presidential years, like this year, right, 2020, 2016, 2012, 8, 4, 2000, right? Okay, every 4 years. Leap years, just so that you remember. So it's based on the leap year calendar, which is cool because you always get that extra day. Candidates like to say they get an extra day to campaign. So even during election years, of the individuals who are registered to vote, meaning they've gone through the voter eligibility application, they may have even received a card of some sort to say they are registered to vote in a particular area with a particular political party. Of those people, about 55 to 65% of those people turn out to vote. So a little over half. And so a little over half of those who are registered to vote turn out and vote. And those small percentages of people are the people who determine who is going to represent a particular city, district, state, and again, our country. And so in comparison to other, the term here is developed countries. I like to say overdeveloped, but that's neither here nor there. In terms of other developed countries and or countries in the West, we have the absolute lowest voter turnout, comparatively speaking. People don't turn out to vote. The percentage of the number of people that turn out to vote gets even lower in what we call off years and or midterm election years. So the 2-year mark between the 4 years of a particular presidency. Midterm elections, the voter turnout is even low. Your text cites somewhat of 40% of those who are registered to vote turn out to vote. So I'm going to treat you guys like we are on CNN, and we are going to search registered. How about we search number of registered voters? Number of registered voters. Oh, that's good. Okay, Google says, oh, you don't need to know my location, Google. Let's see. Number of registered voters by state. Oh, God, I didn't want to get that deep. I just want to tell me just overall. Oh. So there are a number of different resources that I could have used, but I saw that the U.S. Census Bureau, remember we talked about the executive branch, right? So there's 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, judicial, courts, Congress. The executive branch is the presidency, and underneath there are departments: Department of Education, Department of Defense, Department of Veteran Affairs, etc. But also underneath there are bureaus, and the U.S. Census Bureau is one of them. And the census is happening this year, which is awesome. Please, please, please stand up and be counted. Remember what I told you guys, that Census Bureau data is what they use to determine representation. So if your population increases, you get additional representation. It is also used to determine funds. So if your population increases, you are entitled to more funds. But if your population decreases, you are entitled to less funds. So if we're not counted, and there are more people than those who are actually counted, then there are more people taking up less resources in any particular area. And it tends to stay that way for another 10 years. And so on here, they have population and voting rates for congressional districts, voting registration for the election of November 2018, voting registration in November 2016. That might be a good one to look at. So as I'm looking here, they have voting trends by race. They have voting trends by age. They have voting trends by gender, which leads us into the next section of our text. Our text is then goes to partially to the different groups that are, how different groups vote and how those different variables influences how people vote. So hold on, Census Bureau, hold on to that. First, we have to think about, why do people vote? Ask yourself, as someone who I believe will probably be an active member of their community and their society, why would you want to vote? What would be the purpose of you voting? Y'all gonna leave my crystal light alone. Over here getting quarantine thick. Don't do it. Because I am. Anywho, why would you want to vote? Why would you vote? What would be the purpose of you as a citizen voting? Keep this in mind. Now, I want you to think about, why would people in your communities vote? Why would your family members vote? Now, flip that. Why wouldn't they vote? Why would your family members not vote? Why wouldn't your community vote? Some of the same reasons that they would not vote are some of the same reasons that they don't participate in the census. And some of the same reasons that they don't have the resources that they need from having a representative to carry their interests to the various tables that they don't have a seat at are some of the same reasons that they don't have the resources that they need in terms of what happens with the data that comes from the census, which is crazy. But this is here and there. So here are a couple reasons why people don't vote according to your text, and I'll expand on the ones that I don't think your text does a very good job on, but whatever. So it says here, lots of reasons why people don't vote. So one, they feel that their vote does not make a difference. Most people don't understand the electoral process enough to connect their individual vote with a particular candidate, that particular candidate with a particular policy that they propose, and if that policy later is passed and or defeated, and or them actually seeing the outcome or the fruits of that particular policy. So because they can't sort of trace that sort of step-by-step process, they don't feel like their vote really makes a difference. The other thing is that most people don't get to see voter turnout numbers. So I was being me, of course, which I wish I had this kind of resource in the classroom, but I can look on here and I'll look up data. If I said to myself, I want to know how many Black women voted in South Carolina in the 2012 elections, I can research it and I'll get the number. And I know the number that I'm looking at, and I can think about what influenced that number to be that number, right? The average person isn't looking up electoral data. The average person doesn't necessarily know how to, the term here is disaggregate. Disaggregate. The average person doesn't know how to disaggregate and or separate, break down for the purpose of understanding data. So no, I don't see the difference in my vote because I don't necessarily understand how to get meaning from polling data, voting data. I don't know, not polling, excuse me, should be voting. I don't know how to get no information from that. That's one. Two, I don't ever get to see the outcome of the people that go do that government stuff. I have no clue. And since I don't see it, and since I have no clue how to find it, then what difference does it make? The other thing with that one is they don't vote, life goes on. They vote, life goes on. Their person gets elected, life goes on. Their person doesn't get elected. I heard you. Life goes on. And so because people can't always trace exactly how their power influences that process, they assume that their power can have no influence on the process. Not realizing that your refraining from participating makes you think you don't have power, but you actually do, and stopping you from exercising that power is something that is a huge thing in certain parties, but keep that in mind. So citizens don't feel like they make a difference. Citizens feel that there's a lack of qualified candidates. I'll say yes and no, because I then question, how does the average citizen know what a qualified candidate is? often you have people who don't know the qualifications stating that somebody is qualified to do something. Prime example. People believed, and this is not, I understand why you guys don't feel this way, because I don't either, but whatever. So during the 1980s, Donald Trump was associated with extravagance and money and riches and all of these different sort of ideas about affluence and wealth, right? So he was associated with that. He has, because of that association, he sort of carried that with him. So people, I don't even know how to explain it, but people somehow connected that if you were successful in business, that you could successfully run the government because the government is just a business. All of that thought process is just jacked. It's nothing about that. It's correct. The government is not a business. There is not profit to be made. Any monies that are made from government ventures are revenue, and that revenue is put right back into it. So when they sell stamps, there's no shareholders waiting for the money from the post office of selling stamps and shipping packages. That's structure is a very corporate structure that does not exist in government. And you remember when we talked about states, chapter 3, and we talked about the ability of officials to go in and use the government and their money for their personal gain. We don't necessarily have that issue. And if it's ever found that government officials are taking bribes or misappropriating funds, they are prosecuted very quickly and unfortunately put in jail for a very long time. Shout out to Kwame Kilpatrick in Detroit. He shouldn't still be in jail, but that's neither here nor there. But anywho, and so the idea of the average citizen knowing what makes a candidate qualified is problematic. Now I'm about to hurt some people's feelings. People have been wanting Oprah to run for president. I love O, but she's not qualified to be president. She's not. She's not qualified. Will Smith is not qualified. Having basic intelligence does not qualify you for a job. Can you do the job? It's possible, but it doesn't mean that you're qualified. It just doesn't. Qualifications come from a combination of course, intellectual abilities. Yeah, okay. But it also comes from knowledge based on experience, knowledge based on study in a certain field, all of those things, having previous experience with positions like the one that you're trying to run for. So if you're running for president, historically, people who run for president have been either former governors or former U.S. senators. Because if they were former U.S. senators, they would have international experience in terms of international affairs. They would have experience speaking for a large number of people in terms of population. Governor, running a state is very similar to running a country. And so I find it very odd that the public thinks that they know what would make someone qualified. And how do I know that it's odd? Look at what we're dealing with now. Someone who is absolutely incompetent. He was incompetent in business, bankrupt, filed for bankruptcy multiple times, and is now incompetent in the position that he's in. But people think he made money, so he must be able to do this job, which is problematic. Whew. Anyway, another reason people may not vote is because they feel like there are no interesting, clear-cut choices due to the nature of our two-party system. I hate the phrase lesser of two evils. I hate the phrase because the assumption that being an incompetent, racist rapist is the same as someone who dumps some emails. I just, and that's not even a whole, I'm for Hillary is Hillary, that's not even that. It is literally just, this can't be life. But it's life here in the US. Welcome. Yeah. Anywho, next one is negative TV advertisement turns voters off by the end of the election cycle. So if you've been paying attention, I'm sure that you in your state may or may not have been inundated with political advertisements. As it stands, they said Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York, spent $500 million on TV advertisements during his very short political presidential campaign. $500 million. I don't think you understand that's half a billion dollars. Half a billion. 500 million. There are 340 million people in the world, in the U.S. The world, Lord, the U.S. We all could have been millionaires and then some. So yes, that amount of money was wasted, and for most people, because of all of these ads, because there's often mudslinging, meaning negative ads directed towards other candidates. Because of that, people get turned off to politics. And then that reverts you back to the first one where it says their vote doesn't make any difference. Whether I vote or not, they're going to still be doing what they're doing. The world is going to still be turning. What difference does it make? I don't want to participate in this process. It seems very negative. How do I know it's negative? The TV ads tell me that it's negative. Moving forward, it says political scientists debate whether or not non-voting is bad for democracy. So I will say this. As a part of our democracy, our representative form of democracy, that representative part is key, because in order to determine who is going to represent you, we are a majority rules type of government, right? Electoral process. 50 plus 1. You'll hear me say it all the time. 50 plus 1, more than half, right? Cool. So whether or not you participate, as long as those who participate have the 50 plus 1, us as a representative form of democracy, it may not be all bad that people don't vote. That's what some believe. The other part is others believe that not voting is a right. You have the right to not vote if you do not want to vote. You are also understanding that in that right, you don't necessarily get a say in what happens, because your vote is your say in what is happening. And that when you don't like what's happening, then you can take your right to vote or not vote and decide which way you want to go. So many have been debating between what it looks like for our democracy to be filled with hundreds of thousands of people who choose to not vote. Some have said that them choosing not to vote is a sign that they are content, that they're satisfied. This I don't know. It's hard to say. Some people might be satisfied and some people might be apathetic. Some people might be cynical. Some people might just truly believe that no matter what I do, it doesn't really matter. So why would I do something that causes great inconvenience to me? Which is another reason why people choose not to vote. Again, your text compares this particular country, United States, to other countries in the West. Remember, the Western civilization, we call it the West. Other countries in the West, like Europe, Australia, etc. And we have found that, political scientists have found that one reason we don't have as many people showing up to vote is because in a lot of these countries in Europe, you are automatically registered to vote upon turning voting age. We don't have automatic registration. It's been proposed. It has been proposed that once you turn 18, you automatically register to vote, and you don't have to go through this extra step of registering to vote in order to vote. And it's been fought because, again, I've told you before, in terms of thinking about election turnouts, thinking about not turnouts, but election outcomes. There it is. And thinking about election outcomes, Republican candidates do worse when more people show up to vote. So if it were proposed that we had either a national law or that we encourage states to adopt state laws of automatic registration, those of the Republican Party are going to be against it and have been against automatic voting, voter registration, because it increases voter turnout. Increase in voter turnout increases the likelihood that Democrats will win and not Republicans. And so pay attention to those things. Even though it seems like, for most people, a no-brainer. Like, why not just register me to vote? It doesn't make any sense. Now, whether or not I choose to vote is my business. But registering me to vote just seems easy. And so since then, in the early 1990s, there was this motor voter law. Basically, you could register to vote when you were going into the DMV to get a new driver's license or get a identification card. So the thought was young people, once they turned 18 years old, they were either going to go in to get their ID, because you need ID as an adult, or they were going to go in to get their driver's license at some point. And so because either one of those things were going to happen anyway, if they're not going to agree to automatically register people to vote, we'll put a little box on the application for your driver's license, and you can check the box and you're registered to vote then. That increased voter turnout exponentially, but not to the level that automatic registration would have. All right. I naturally just said to myself, is there any questions, everybody? Anybody got any questions? But you're not here and I'm talking to myself. So yeah, I'm sure you have questions. But moving on. Anywho, retrospective on voting. Your text talks about, we were talking about why people don't vote, and then some of the motivations behind why people do vote, right? Why people do make the decision to step out and vote. And sometimes it's what we call a referendum, not the technical term for referendum, but referendum in the sense of, we're going to vote because we want that person out, or we're going to vote because these bad things are happening under their watch. And because it's happening under their watch, we got to get them out. So it may be a particular person, and or it may be the party that happens to be in charge at that moment. Your text makes the point for the 2008 elections, presidential election of President Obama, and that all that we had gone through as a country from 2000 up until the 2008 elections, had a war, a financial crisis, all of these things. Political scientists believe that the 2008 election was a response to all of the negativity that we experienced underneath the Bush administration. And I don't think that that's far from the truth. I think it's actually quite truthful that people tend to respond based on what they perceive to be happening in the country as a nation. Same thing with the 2016 elections. There were some people fired up by their own hatred, their own bigoted views, that voting for a particular candidate that was not qualified, that was not a part of the Republican establishment, who clearly had never held a government position before, who had absolutely no experience, etc., that voting for him wasn't even about whether or not he'd be an experienced, knowledgeable candidate, but more so as reactionary to the 8 years that they experienced under President Obama. So it can happen both ways. All right. We'll go back to that. All right, so this particular video, we're going to end right about here before we go into, oh, that's why it's off. 2, 3. All right, so this particular video, we're going to end just about here before we start on the next section where we talk about who votes. I will leave you with this to think about before you actually start the second video. In most democracies, again, we are a democracy. In most democracy, the average voters are the following. Middle-aged. Middle-aged would be, right now, it would be younger baby boomers and Gen Xers. Gen Xers were born from about 1964 to some say about 1978-9. So 64, 78, 79. Baby boomers, of course, were born between 1942-ish, 45-ish, well, 42, because this is World War II. 42 until the early 1960s. So that's considered, younger baby boomers, so closer to the late 50s, early 60s, and then Generation Xers. Those individuals would be considered middle-aged. All right, so that we're clear, I'm not middle-aged. Get it together, correct. Anywho, those who are middle-aged, better educated. Your text says better educated, but I want you to keep in mind that there's a difference between a high school educated voter and a college educated voter and a post-undergrad voter. All of those are different. However, for the sake of this conversation, when they say better educated, they're meaning college and post-undergrad, meaning like grad school, law school, medical school, stuff like that. Urban in this case does not mean what the colloquial or the connoted, meaning common sort of way of using the term urban as a synonym for ghetto. Urban literally just means city dweller, someone who lives within a certain mile radius of the city. And then it says, finally, likely to identify with a particular political party, so that they likely to identify a particular party, literally meaning when they register to vote, they identify with the party on their voter registration, and or I would say probably and they participate in things associated with their political affiliation. The primaries, they may participate in campaigns, things of that nature. What your text does not identify and what I am going to identify for you and put on here, they are very likely white. And not only are they white, they're more than likely married. So, average voters are middle-aged, white, married, better education, urban dwelling, politically active peoples. Those are your average voters. So how do I translate that, Dr. Mack? I'm glad you asked. If those are your average voters, then it means the agenda and the desires of the average voter is what is paid attention to and is what is catered to. If you do not see yourself anywhere in the average voter, yeah, you're not supposed to. You're not necessarily going to. And a part of the reason that you don't is because you probably are part of groups that don't regularly vote. They don't vote on a regular basis. As we go through these various variables, I want you to pay attention to your specific variables that are associated with the different groups that you happen to be a part of. Pause here. I wanted to add something. Your text doesn't add this, but I'm going to add it because I think you guys will be thinking about this and it's becoming more of an issue. These people are also more than likely cishet, meaning cisgendered heterosexual, meaning that they perform their gender and they perform their sexuality in quote unquote heteronormative ways, right? So this is the average person. So the interests, the issues, the desires and wants of this average person may or may not reflect the interests and desires of you. So keep this in mind. So when people say, I don't feel like my vote makes a difference, I don't feel like it has anything to do with me, sometimes it is because the people that share that person's demographics or variables, as is talked about in the text, are not the majority and they're not the average. So if you're not the majority and you're not the average, then you get stuck in the position that your interests aren't heard. But that's a whole nother conversation about the fallacy of democracy. Different conversation, different class. Anywho, so we'll stop in this video here and we will pick up the discussion in 11.2 where we talk about the factors that contribute directly to who votes. See you then.